Pope Francis and the Environment, Monday Musings. Recently, we celebrated the 5 year anniversary of an encyclical letter that Pope Francis wrote on the environment. It's called Laudato Si, on care for our common home. It's actually about a month ago, a little over a month ago, that we celebrated this anniversary. I just came across it recently, so that was why. We'll talk about Pope Francis and the environment on this 5 year anniversary of this important encyclical letter. In this encyclical letter, he has a very broad audience. Unlike many other encyclicals, he specifically says that Pope Francis, I wish to address every person living on this planet. So his audience is, very broad. It's not just for members of the church. And in this encyclical letter, he's addressing some macro issues, some big issues, things like climate change, fossil fuels, depletion of natural resources, nuclear and biological weapons, technology, drug use. So these are obviously big issues. And even though many of us probably don't have any responsibility for some of those big issues, he also talks about how in our lives that we can make a difference in these things even if we're not responsible, for solving all of these big issues, these macro issues. So even on a micro level, on a small level, by the choices we make, we can affect the environment in small ways. And one of the things we see most importantly in this encyclical letter is he talks about how the environment, how like in the environment the human person is central. So the human person is central to any environmental concerns, and he even says there can be no ecology without an adequate anthropology. So if we're going to address anything with the environment, we can only do that when the human person is at the center of that. Because creation, and we see this in the creation accounts of Genesis, creation is all about, when God created the world, at the crowning achievement of his creation is the human person. And so we see in this encyclical letter how important when we address environmental issues, at the center of that must be a concern for the human person, because again, the human person is the crowning achievement of God's creation. And so he talks a lot about how everything is interconnected. So we're interconnected with the environment we live in, we're interconnected with nature and all sorts of things like that. And in this encyclical, you really do see his, the great appreciation, I guess you would say, that he has for nature. He says, Pope Francis, God has written a precious book whose letters are the multitude of created things present in the universe. And then he quotes the Canadian bishops by saying, from panoramic vistas to the tiniest living form, nature is a constant source of wonder and awe. It is a continuing revelation of the divine. And then he even goes on to quote Pope John Paul II. He says, we can say that alongside revelation, properly so called, contained in sacred scripture, there is a divine manifestation in the blaze of the sun and the fall of the night. And he even goes on to say, which this is, I think, a very interesting quote. He says, we were not meant to be inundated by cement, asphalt, glass, and metal, and deprived of physical contact with nature. And he does go on to say, so, he's kind of showing this appreciation for nature. And at the same time, he's also saying, it's not necessarily the responsibility of the church to offer answers to all these questions. Pope Francis says, on many concrete questions, the church has no reason to offer a definitive opinion. She knows that honest debate must be encouraged among experts while respecting divergent views. Nonetheless, science and religion, with their distinctive approaches to understanding reality, can enter into an intense dialogue fruitful for both. And so again, with this, the human person has to be at the center, and then all throughout this encyclical, you see how much concern he has for the poor, and he stresses how environmental issues seem to affect the poor in the most severe way, and he talks about how, in particular, like businesses will so often do in developing countries what they would never do in developed countries. And so he says the poor really do get affected so much by these environmental issues, and he says many, because of poverty due to environmental issues, many are having to flee their own country because of things like that. And then he goes on to talk numerous times about, and these are some ways that we can have an impact on the environment. He talks about how we live in this basically consumeristic culture that is producing and consuming at rates that are just not healthy or sustainable. and how we live in this, kind of throwaway culture where we just so easily, without even giving a passing thought, just get rid of food, and even says how 1/3 of all food is thrown away each year. And so we kind of see, in particular, in our own country, because we are, more developed, we do see how we can get so caught up in this consumeristic culture that we so easily just consume without really giving any priority to what we're consuming, and how easily we just get rid of stuff without even giving it a passing thought. And so, it is important for us to be aware of what we're producing, what we're consuming, and, we can have an impact based on what we consume. What we choose to buy, what we choose to purchase, all those things do have an impact. And so, if we choose not to buy things, and even has a quote about that, if we choose not to purchase things for a particular reason, that can have an impact on, whether, people continue to sell those things in the future. And if we choose to support other establishments that, maybe are a little more in line with our worldview as Catholics, then we're also making an impact on culture. And he does talk to young people in particular, if I can find this quote. He talks to young people in particular of how there is kind of this, growing consensus among younger people that they would like to have have more of a positive impact on the environment, but he also acknowledges how growing up in a consumeristic culture can be a problem for that. In those countries which should be making the greatest changes in consumer habits, young people have an ecological sensitivity and a generous spirit, and some of them are making admirable efforts to protect the environment. At the same time, they have grown up in a milieu of extreme consumerism and affluence, which makes it difficult to develop other habits. So again, young people, we do have this ecological awareness, and so and you also can, make changes positively in the world in which you find yourselves. And just kind of on a final note, he probably wasn't speaking about landmarks in the sense where we're seeing landmarks taken down all throughout our country, but he does have this kind of unique quote that maybe is applicable to now. I obviously wouldn't be aware where Pope Francis would stand on tearing down monuments. I would imagine that when since he canonized Juniper Serra, now Saint Juniper Serra, that he most likely would not be in favor of toppling statues of saints. He says, there is also a need to protect those common areas, visual landmarks, and urban landscapes, which increases our sense of belonging, of rootedness, of feeling at home within a city, which includes us and brings us together. So this was a little more lengthy than most of my Monday Musings. It's a lengthy document. I'll include a link if you want to get a copy. I'll include the link if you want to purchase a copy. And if you watch this on Instagram, you have to go to the YouTube channel. Apparently, either I'm not aware of how to do it, or it can't be done. I can't post links on Instagram. So I'll just close with this beautiful hymn that St. Francis composed and that Pope Francis included in his encyclical. Praise be to you, my Lord, with all your creatures, especially brother sun, who is the day and through whom you give us light. And he is beautiful and radiant with great splendor, and bears a likeness of you most high. Praise be to you, my Lord, through sister moon and the stars. In heaven you formed them, clear and precious and beautiful. Praise be to you, my Lord, through brother wind, and through the air cloudy and serene in every kind of weather, through whom you give sustenance to your creatures. Praise be to you, my Lord, through sister water, who is very useful and humble and precious and chaste. Praise be to you, my Lord, through brother fire, through whom you light the night, and he is beautiful and playful and robust and strong. So again, this was a little longer than most of my Monday Musings, so if you got through it, well, then bless you. If you want to get the links, obviously I'll include them, and whatever we can do to protect the environment is obviously something worthy, because it's something we are passing on to next generations, and so we want to leave them a home that's fittable, that is formidable for them. So just some Monday Musings on Pope Francis and the environment on this 5-year anniversary of the Encyclical Letter. God bless.